Hi again. Emerging new technologies are revolutionized consumer habits as well as the football TV landscape. I think you've heard more than enough names as OTT platforms, pay TV networks, social media giants. Where does the future of broadcasting lie? What is the future for the broadcasting? A partir de ahora, en este siguiente panel, vamos a hablar del futuro de las retransmisiones, porque hemos hablado o hemos escuchado hablar muchísimo sobre las plataformas pay-per-view, OTT, qué van a hacer los grandes gigantes de los medios de comunicación, así que a partir de ahora vamos a hablar de todo esto y mucho más. Please welcome Carlos Cantó, Guido, Veronica Diquattro, Pedro Presa y Rodrigo Garza. Big applause for them, please. So, Carlos, all yours.
Thank you so much for your time and your passions. This is the second to last, but absolutely not least panel. These two intensive and productive days. So it's a pleasure to have here four distinguished guest speakers. Thanks so much for your time, for taking your time. And it's a pleasure to moderate you. So we have in order, Guido, welcome.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
And thanks for coming. He's president of the 49ers, San Francisco 49ers, as well the CEO at Elevate Sports Ventures. Formerly, he used to work at Phoenix Coyotes, Dallas Cowboys, and Legend Sales and Marketing. And thanks and welcome. And so far, so good, 3-0. All the way to the Super Bowl, and hopefully your team will join my team at the Super Bowl.
Let's hope so.
Thanks so much, Al. Veronica Diquattro, Executive Vice President of Southern Europe DAZN, formerly working at Google as well as in Spotify.
Yes.
Grazie mille for coming and benvenuta.
Thank you.
My Italian is like as poor as this, but I try my best. Pedro Presa, co-founder and CEO of MyCujoo. Did I?
Correct.
MyCujoo, with two O's. Formerly working at European leagues, Beach Soccer and 1.FM. Obrigado, benvindo, Pedro.
Gracias.
And last but not least, Rodrigo Garza, Global Marketing and Sponsorship Director at the Adecco Group, formerly working at the IOC, International Olympic Committee, GoFundle, and has been professional field hockey player, participating at 3 Olympic Games, Sydney, Athens, and Beijing, and collecting 1 silver medal. Congratulations, bienvenido y gracias.
Thank you.
Good. The title of the panel is about where does the future of broadcasting lie, and we assume that the simple and easy answer is money. Yeah, I like Jerry Maguire movie. And there are 3 quotes, right? Show me the money, that's something nice. Help me, help you, that at some point, as we are as part of an ecosystem, every single stakeholders of the ecosystem can help or should help the other and the other way around in order to create synergies and move forward all together as an industry. And the third one, which is more in a personal level, is when Botox-less Tom Cruise says to Botox-less Renée Zellweger, you complete me. But that's another day story. Okay, good. So let's start talking about, I'm going to put on the table a couple of questions for everybody, okay, and then individual questions according to your entity or specialty. Is that okay? So nowadays, the framework of the paradigm of access to audiovisual content has dramatically changed over the last, let's say, 3 to 12 years. For example, PPV, pay-per-views, OTTs, influencer, social media, fans creating their own content and distributing them as well. Jerry speaking at Icebreaker, what are the main challenges that stakeholders are facing in this new paradigm? Maybe Al can start.
Well, obviously in the NFL, if I put that hat on, we sort of roll our rights up at the national level and it gets distributed but to our major partners. And so for us, it's not a big challenge. I think what we're all trying to get is distribution, eyeballs. And I think in the next couple of years, what you'll see, certainly in the NFL, is I do not believe the pie will shrink. I just think the number of slices will be very different. And so, you know, linear television for us won't necessarily go away, but I do think other platforms like the ones up here will have a big say in how we distribute content, not just on match day, as people in this room would call it, or game day, as I would call it, but non-game day. I think really if you look at content inside of this space, I think there's two verticals that really continue to grow. It's sort of cable news, given our political landscapes, and it's live sports. And we firmly believe, obviously in the NFL, we have high demand for 16 games. 47 of the top 50 programs in the United States last year were NFL football games. And so the question is, how can we get more people watching those? How can we get distribution that gets in the hands of my three daughters who are 10, 8, and 6 who watch content in a very different way than maybe I do or my father or my mother have? And then how can we as a team outside of the NFL rights produce and develop our own content and use folks like that are on this panel to distribute that in ways that frankly us as a team cannot. And so I think in the NFL it's much easier than maybe it might be in MLB or NBA, where you have national rights and you have local rights and RSNs are changing. In the NFL, it's a little bit more of simpler of a world.
Okay, thank you all. Veronica, what's your take?
So I think, as you said, that is very clear, right, that technology had an impact on our lives across many sectors. We have seen that also talking about my experience with streaming across entertainment overall. And the reality is that actually football or sports in general has been the last one touched by this change. Because if we think about the Netflix and the Spotify, they've been in the market for more than 10 years, right? While us with DAZN, we started to see this opportunity when it was 2016. So we identified this gap in the market and decided to work to shift really this paradigm, which is basically the way that users discover, access, and consume, enjoy sports. And this is not only true from a technological access way, as you were talking about distribution, but it's also true in the way we produce this content and work around this. So for example, the beauty of the technology is really to create also truly immersive and enhancing experiences, giving you something that the linear TV can't give you, or maybe used to do it in a different way. I think an example that is interesting in this is what we are doing with our FIBA basketball World Cup, where we use, for example, 20 different cameras, audio from the teams. We even use virtual reality to create some very enhanced experience in terms of visualization. So in all of this, the challenge for us as an OTT, I think, is really to try always to be ahead of the innovation. So to make sure that you are the first one, to understand how users are going to change their behaviors, because this is really the key to understand how the demand is changing and be able to predict and anticipate that with your product, with your content, with your distribution strategy. And if you are able to do that, then you're really going to be able, to succeed in the market. The reality is also that the majority of the time, these informations really on the insights of the users' data are in front of us. But sometimes we either don't see that or don't connect the dots in time or in the right way. An example for me that is very indicative is what we have seen happening with piracy years ago, right? In music, for example, at the beginning, in movies, was exactly that, right? The user was telling us what they wanted, but there was not yet a service that was able to provide the right answer. So that's, I think, is the challenge for companies like us to make sure that we keep on succeed and grow the market.
Thank you, Grazie. Pedro.
Thank you. There are two perspectives, according to our point of view in MyCujoo. Point number one is, how can technology enable rights holders to lower the cost of production and reaching the consumer? And this is very important because nowadays, most properties, premium in each of their markets, they have producers that are, and distributors that are creating the content and reaching out to the consumer. We really believe that in the foreseen future, some of these properties will not have rights holders producing this content, so we work a lot on enabling production tools and content creation tools on the cloud that are scalable, completely agnostic, to make sure that the end consumer is receiving this content. At the same time, that there's a second perspective, and Guido said really well. Sports are now having a prime time in certain distribution channels, which the consumer is now subscribing. When we move into the internet space, you're going to start competing with multiple other platforms that do not distribute only sports. And this will include Netflix, this will include multiple other types of and forms of content. And we do believe that premium is very important, but there's a very important value in long tail, because contents are seasonal, contents are cyclical, and there needs to be ways to engage with consumers on a daily 24/7 basis, right? So the more content you offer to the consumer, and a sports consumer, they like different formats, but live is still king. We can tell that by our data. 80% of the users coming to MyCujoo, they come and watch live content. And that's when they spend most of the time. We have, for instance, the third division of Malaysia. We have people spending 40 minutes average time coming to watch this content, or the fourth division in Brazil, 27 minutes. So we really see that live is still a very important form of content for the sports consumer. So I think in the near future, we're going to see a lot of work together between different parties to make sure that the industry is working towards the end consumer and able to drive them out of other platforms like data companies, Netflix, to make sure that the sports continues to thrive.
Okay, good, excellent. Obrigado. Rodrigo, your turn.
Yeah, I think I agree with all the comments from my colleagues. If I can add something, I think the biggest challenge is the format of the content. I think right now there is a mismatch with the habits of the viewers and the product that we are putting on their screens, right? I think the main challenge, or what we need to discuss really urgently, is the format of the content that we deliver. I think nowadays no one can stay 90 minutes, watching a match, and highlights, previews, all the different formats that these guys are creating are much more efficient. So I think that's the biggest challenge, the format of the content. Yeah.
Perfect, excellent. Over the last, let's say, here we have a brand, 2 OTTs, different style, different approach, different objective, and 1 property as well as investor. Over the last, let's say, 2 to 5 years, 2 other important stakeholders have had a presence in the landscape of sports, media, rights, etc., which are the former called social media, the Facebook, the Twitters, that are not any longer social media, but just portals or platforms to get access to content, among them social conversational content, as well as sports, and then betting and DFS, daily fantasy sports. For example, as you know, FanDuel has Bundesliga rights in selected countries, as well as the ATP events in selected countries, and DraftKings has been partially acquired by ESPN+, which means Disney, right? How do you see these coming newcomers in terms of so-called social media, Facebook, Twitter, etc., as well as betting, and especially daily fantasy sports, where they can combine streamline, data, betting?
It's a loaded question. Considering I spent Sunday with Peter Hutton from Facebook, I have a good idea of what they're thinking about. And as a sports league or team property, we really have 4 revenue buckets, if you think about it: media, seating, commercial or sponsorship, as we call it, and premium or suites. And so from a league perspective, I think it was said very well, we have great content, but our game is now about 3 hours and call it 7 or 8 minutes. And so how do we work with our technology partners, our broadcast partners, our sponsors on reducing the amount of time without losing the ad blocks that frankly we need to have to drive the revenue in our marketplaces. In addition, you bring up gambling. Obviously in the States, it's becoming a big thing. It already was over here. And there's different prognosticators, but call it 2022, 2023, most of the states in the US will have some form of legalized gambling. And what does that mean relative to the broadcast? The Washington Capitals and the Washington Wizards now obviously had games where literally live lines were on, and that's very new in the United States. That has not happened over time. And what does that do to the people that are tuning in, and how might they watch one set of broadcasts where, hey, lines aren't a big deal to maybe my father or somebody else, but as a young consumer that really wants to think about gambling and betting, is there another distribution platform or another broadcast where they can get all of that at their fingertips? And I don't have the answer to it. I just know that everybody's figuring out right now, how do we reduce the ad blocks without lowering our revenue? And you're seeing that now with sort of ads while the game is going on. And then how do we take advantage of all the folks that are frankly starting to gamble or using mobile gambling and or fantasy to drive sort of consumption at the highest levels for people that might not necessarily be traditional sports fans but want to engage in a different way.
Okay, thank you. Veronica.
So I think when we talk about different players that are entering the market, which is becoming crowded, I think for us as an OTT is like to have a confirmation that what we are doing is the right way. And that was actually what was happening also in the other sectors. So the moment that you see Facebook entering the space, trying to do the same things, right? So it's a confirmation that that's the future, right? That's the way consumption is going to go. So even to be put on the same level, it's a great achievement for us. That said, I think what is relevant and is important to understand is also what is the real core and DNA of each one of these companies, because obviously this is going to impact the way you define your strategy, what is your final objective in what you're trying to do. And in this, obviously, if you take the social network, betting, they all have different aims. Than ourselves, for example. So we were created from sports fans, for sports fans, to make sports more accessible and affordable and really grow the audience of sports. So that's what is really guiding our actions. So I think this is like an important lens that we need to take into account when we evaluate what could be the future once this player enter in the market. Another consideration is also the fact that every player could be seen as a partner. Yep. So we have discussed that also, mentioning how we can put synergies together, work together. For example, we did recently a partnership with Discovery to integrate the Eurosport channel. And that was the first time ever that an OTT service integrated a linear channel. So I think that there could be also some interesting new panorama, and partnerships that then can be developed from that, as long as this is serving the ultimate mission of the company.
Actually, you have mentioned all these partnerships, and recently has been announced that you are becoming part of Comcast. Yeah. Offering in the United States of America.
Exactly, and that's another example, right? How you actually collaborate with the other players, with the other partners to reach a wider audience, to be discovered by more and more sports fans.
Okay, grazie. Pedro.
In MyCujoo, we really have a clear opinion when it comes to legal gambling and gaming and how this adds value to the consumer. But mostly our role is to work on the behalf of the rights holders, the federations, the clubs and the leagues that work with us. We have a different model than the DAZN. We don't acquire the rights in the same way. We work in partnership with our member associations. So we do believe that when gambling is legal or when people are using the data over the competitions to do fantasy gaming or when data companies are streaming content that is IP protected, that obviously this adds value. But our role is we're building technology on a daily basis to make sure that if betting companies are leveraging data from certain competitions that we broadcast, that at least they have footage that is reliable and is serving the end consumer with quality data. At the same time that the federation is being financially compensated for this when this is legally allowed. For fantasy data is the same way. When it comes to data companies, we really believe that so far they have not proven to add value to rights holders. Actually, rights holders have been putting content in social media for years, growing audience and consumer bases there, and actually getting no return on investment. That was one of the main reasons why you created MyCujoo actually in the first place. And I think they go even a bit beyond. You see many times when there's collaborations of media companies or sports rights holders distributing live content, then there's like 20 pages broadcasting the same content in the same platform illegally. So we really believe that our work is to make sure that we pass the voice of the rights holders and make sure that we advise them and work together to make a more sustainable industry on the internet. Is it around data? Is it data for gaming or data for the consumer?
Okay, Rodrigo.
Look, I think for brands is fantastic news. I mean, look, what we really need is engaged viewers, is engaged fans, is people having conversations, is where we can really make conversions and we can have those conversations with those users that we are targeting, right? So for us, everything that comes with technology, with data, with engagement of those fans, it's fantastic news because it's when we increase our activity, our conversions, and our return. So for us, it's incredible that those players are coming in and are giving us the platform to convert.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about measurement. Yeah? You as a brand, you require some kind of impacts from a visibility perspective and other KPIs that you have in your tableau de bord, in your scoreboard. When it comes to sponsorship, you as OTTs, you are requested by brand, but also by properties to provide some kind of figures in terms of audience, fragmented audience, other type of audience, maybe. And you as a property, as well as investor, you also ask and need all this data, right? Before, in the linear TV landscape, it was easier, or maybe more difficult, because now you can track much easier and much rapidly and quicker all what happens in the marketplace in real time. What's your thoughts about this measurement with the incorporation of OTTs as well as the social media, etc., in this new landscape?
I think for the San Francisco 49ers, probably the most important is incremental eyeballs to, we know who our core fans are today, and frankly, I don't think they're going anywhere. If you look in your crystal ball and say, what are the challenges inside the NFL and or what are the opportunities, I think at the youth level, participation in U.S. sport is declining across all sports to some degree. And we want to make sure that kids are playing our games. We want to make sure that they're tuning into our games. And the interesting part of those who are mobilely streaming our games now, they are actually really incremental to those that are watching on linear. And that's really good for us. It means we're reaching a new audience. And then the next step is, certainly from just my perspective at the 49ers, is how do we really become a global brand? We really are inside the Bay Area. Obviously, the San Francisco 49ers are a massive brand, but when you compare that to the likes of the football team down the street or the one in Barcelona, it pales in comparison from a size perspective. And I think the NFL and the San Francisco 49ers, we could all do a better job expanding that footprint, not just from a broadcast perspective, but frankly how we invest in markets, how we grow our social and digital footprint on non-game day. That's really what's important to us, is how do we grow the next fan and or acquire the new fan that frankly wasn't watching our sport before.
Thank you.
Yeah, for us as an OTT, you're right, it changed things, right? And obviously when there are changes, there are always complexities because of the measurement is different from what we used to have before in linear. So on one hand, you have the necessity to educate stakeholders, as the rights holders, the brands, the sponsor, to a new way of measuring your audience. And then on the other hand, you also need to make sure that you're able to define something that is comparable, right? So that you can still use it as a benchmark with some of the linear audience because it's still there, right? So it's still in the market. The advantage of the audience that you get on an OTT as ours is obviously that the type of data that you get are much more punctual, precise, and also give you an insights on the user behavior that is completely different from the linear TV. Because you're able to see when the user comes on the platform, so the exact minute that starts to watch your content, when he's leaving, from which device, cities, the segmentation in terms of age, demographic. And all of these are real data. So they are not like sample or extrapolated from a survey or the other measurements that we used to have since like years with the linear TV. So I think the advantage is going to be that we're still going to have obviously audience and we're going to have much more richer information coming from that. The technology through which we are going to deliver this exposure and give this reporting and measurement is going to be different. And what we're working on, and we're doing this with the players such as Google and their product team, is to develop more and more contextually relevant advertising and reporting systems that we can provide to our partners and brands to enhance the way they have access to this data, helping them to make better decisions for the rights holders, for the sponsors, and so on. So I think it's going to be very interesting once we are going to go through these phases. That once this is going to become also more established in terms of measurement, to see how all the process of the media buying is going to be changed.
Okay, thank you. Grazie, Pedro.
In MyCujoo, we work with two types of data that we think are very valuable, not only for commercializing the content, but as well to add value to the consumer experience. The first point is we collect metadata over the video on the actions that are happening in real time over the game, and then we just attribute it down to the entity of the player. And if we look into the community of the athletes itself, it's already very valuable. So we're really trying to find ways to engage with the community of the athlete, the mother, the father, by aggregating this data and creating entities and content that we collect automatically around them. And this obviously adds a multitude of opportunities. But then, as Veronica was explaining well, we really believe that the consumer is king, right? And in order to make sure that the experience is pleasant, but to make sure that as well we have a sustainable business, we need to find ways of collecting data in a responsible way under the GDPR rules, at the same time that we work with sponsors to serve qualitative activations that allow the brands to have an emotional interaction with the consumer, with the content itself, and I can name a few actions. Basically, whenever there's a goal, there's an actions goal sponsored by a specific brand, or you allow the brand to communicate with the consumer on the chat system, multiple ways, never disturbing the experience, because What we really don't want, and Guido was explaining really well, like the ad blockers, we really want to make sure that we serve quality advertising and sponsorship to the consumer that relates with them and adds value. As an example, working with Coca-Cola, offering the opportunity for our consumers to compete in a context to win World Cup tickets or discounts for Nike or Adidas. But at the same time, allowing the brand to be present in the eyeballs without disturbing their interaction with the content, because we want to make sure that the user stays, interacts with the content, and the brand gets as much exposure as possible during the life cycle of the content.
Obrigado, thank you. Rodrigo.
From a brand perspective, I think the main difference is the sophistication. No? Now the sponsorship offer, it's much more sophisticated. And the other main difference is that, well, before we were focusing on intangible objectives. Now you really focus on tangible objectives. I mean, when you have the KPIs or the results of the campaign, whatever, you show to your management the number of views or the number of downloads. What are they looking at? They are looking only at downloads. They don't care about views, right? So now we just, that's the main difference. We just focus on tangible return and tangible measurements. So conversions, downloads, applications, sales. So depending on your industry, but conversions and something that can justify the investment, but on a direct way, yeah.
Very good, thank you. Let's talk a little bit about now fun. You have mentioned this. We have here a stat. Source is Iris Intelligence. You know that in life there are only three things: truth, lies, and statistics. Okay, so this is the statistic. According to them, which I fully respect, obviously, percentage of consumption of TV sports content through streaming. China, Europe, USA. Okay? Millennials, 18 to 35, and non-millennials, 35 plus. China, 72% millennials, 48% non-millennials. Europe, 58% millennials, 39% non-millennials. USA, 38% millennials, 12% non-millennials. So millennials are really embracing all these new platforms and ways and means to get access to this sport content, right? So, but at the same time, we know that millennials, and this is not a criticism at all, they have a shorter span of attention compared to previous generations. Maybe you're not, Pedro, but the rest.
I have different numbers.
Anyway, that's another story, sorry. So what's your point, and we can start with Rodrigo now, in terms of how the new media, let's call it, like they always, can embrace more, and what's the impact of this fact, the new generations, millennials, their span of attention, but willing to watch sports content through streaming?
I think we have mentioned before, right? The key is the format of the content. So we cannot keep the current format because that's not working for them. You know, we need to work on shorter formats, on different kind of styles of highlights, previews, documentaries. I think many of the right holders are doing right, but the key is to change the format of the content. I think that would be the main insight. And on the other side, the millennials want to have active participation. They don't want to just sit there and watch. They want to participate. So any kind of possibility for them to be part of the game would be amazing. There are some cases where millennials are already participating actively, you know, not only on polls, but also influencing on the game, you know. I mean, there are some cases. But so those two things, the format of the content and to embrace the participation of the viewers. I think those are the key to attract them. Yeah.
Thank you. Pedro?
According to data that we have collected over the last 5 years, we do believe that live is still a very important form of content. However, the way you serve the content and the environment where you serve it, the experience is even more important. So 80% of our consumers consume content through mobile. And this is millennials, right? Most of our users are, I would say, 75 to 80% between 18 and 35 years. And 80% consume content to mobile. What we still see is that short forms of content, they are important, but they drive a lifespan of attention that is very short. So our biggest objective is to increase and continue accelerating live content, the game itself, because that's what drives huge average times. As I said before, we have people spending 40 minutes watching the third division of Malaysia. And actually, one of our top 10 most viewed competitions is an under-13 league in Brazil, in the Maranhão States, which is really a small competition. And what we feel is it's as much important, the content you're serving, as the way you are serving this content and the environment and the context. And then the actions you create around the live as well generate a lot of engagement. And you said involving the audience through chats, allowing them to collect highlights, to share highlights, to be part of a movement, because millennials, they want to be part of something bigger than themselves, but at the same time be part of a movement that already exists. And they have their individual tastes, but at the same time be part of a movement. And I think if you create that environment, serving the right content, you have the perfect product.
Excellent. Obrigado. Veronica.
I totally agree. I think that we are seeing not only a change in the way you consume content, consume sports, but also in the way you follow sports. So we say that we are actually seeing a new breed of fans that is not only following the league as before, but they're actually following their super fan athletes that becomes like a superstar. As you said, the live is important, but sometimes it's not enough. They want more from content. They want something richer, more insightful, more engaging, and that's where the format comes in. We tried and tested many different things in this sense, working with docufilms, behind the scenes, with our originals, and it all goes in this direction, right? Try to really find something that attracts the attention of the users and allows you to keep a longer lifetime of the content that you are streaming. I think also another aspect in this of the streaming is to give the full control of the content to the users. Because through a platform like the OTT, then you can actually access to the content when you want, how you want, wherever you are. And this is true thanks to the product integration in the majority of the devices, but it's also true because you have not the constrictions of the linear TV that force you to have a specific schedule, but you can actually have all matches of your clubs, of your leagues. So you're able to actually follow all the content you want and not just the ones that the broadcast choose for you. So I think in this, also the streaming and the OTT, again, uses technology to follow the new direction of the fans.
Okay, grazie. Al?
They all said it much better than I would. They talked about live content. The content has to be good. And so for us, it's about the game, the game, the game. The game is the hero feature. That is what people tune in for, on whatever platform they're tuning in on. And so in the NFL, 50% of the teams who make the playoffs don't make it the next year. It's unbelievable parity. Every single fan wakes up in every single market in August and thinks they have a chance to win the NFL Super Bowl. Maybe that's not true, but I think most of the teams believe that they've improved and they have a chance. And if you just look at our market, last year we lose our quarterback. This year we start 3-0. The content, the parity, the closeness, the proximity from a points perspective that our games are played within, that keeps people tuned in. And I think us as a team and us as a league in the NFL needs to continue to have that type of parity, needs to make sure that every single fan base feels as though their ownership group, their coach, their GM, their sporting director is putting the best players on the field that give the fans the opportunity or the want to tune in. And then I think as a league, the question then becomes is, how do we slice and dice that content? In the NFL, you saw, obviously years ago, the red zone. So it's the same product, the same hero feature, but people that want to watch a bunch of scores and a bunch of red zone watch it that way. Those who might want to gamble on it might want to watch it the traditional way. And so how might we think about the pros and cons, right? The cons might be it's a 3-hour and 7-minute game, but it's a highly strategic game. There's only 28 minutes of live footage in an NFL football game. However, it's probably the most gambled on sport that's out there because there's so many proposition bets that you can make throughout a game that can keep people tuned in. And then I think the next wave for us is how do we put fans inside of, a player helmet or a cam? How do they get inside of Jimmy Garoppolo's head as he looks down the field to make a pass? Because that's what, sort of the fans that I see, all the young fans growing up want to know, what's Jimmy see when he drops back to make a pass? And how might that be different than what I'm watching on my mobile device or linear television? How can I literally create just that one player? And I think that's what we lean on folks like this for, which is what is the next wave of content taking the hero feature that we've created, we're embracing, we're sort of stewarding, and making that, fun and engaging for the next wave or the next generation. Forget just millennials, the next generation that come even after that, which frankly is going to change the game even more than it's already been changed today.
Thank you. I think that we have 5 minutes only. So more content means also more content, and more sophisticated content means also more scores, right? And at some point, you need to be profitable, all of you. Everybody has to be profitable. According to Iris Intelligence again, the willingness to pay for the top 4 sports as part of the streaming services in Europe is, in China, 59% millennials, 51% non-millennials, which is good. Europe, 51, and USA, 43. So, bottom line, half of population is willing to pay for the streaming services, half not, which is a question mark. Because in some cases, in some countries, they are used not to pay, right? To wrap up, last question. As experts in this topic, how do you envision the situation of the access to the audiovisual sport content by 2025? How the future will look like? Where are the main revenue streams coming by 2025?
I think for the NFL, they're coming, again, I just use a pizza slice or pie. I think the slices, there'll be more slices, but the revenues will be in the same buckets in the sense of still going to be media, it's still going to be local revenue streams. I do think the interesting piece is these folks are producing it at reduced cost than what probably happens today. And so the profit margins might be very different moving forward, right? The amount of, we all talk about these ad blocks is, oh my God, we might lose a commercial break here, but then the question is are we really actually losing commercial breaks? Is there other ways to monetize this content? And so frankly, I pinch myself every day that I get to be in the sports and entertainment industry. I think it's a fantastic industry that technology partners are really enhancing the game, enhancing our monetization efforts, are enhancing sort of fandom, and I don't see that going away anytime soon. I'm a big believer in live sports, and I'm a big believer in folks that frankly are making it better for the fans that want to consume it in the way they want to consume it.
Thank you. Veronica?
So I think the landscape is going to be quite different in 5 years. What we are seeing with the entrance of the OTT and what this means for us now is that we are seeing a fragmentation, right, of the market. Because what is happening is that some of the linear traditional channel player are keeping some of the top tier properties of rights because obviously they need it to keep us surviving and to go through the decline of the subscriber base and to remain competitive in the market. So then what happens is that you have some of these rights that maybe increase in values because there is a new entrant, as it could be ourselves in some of of the markets, so we increase this value, and we manage to get a piece, a piece of the cake. And then we have the long tails rights, right, that then are left from the traditional players because they don't make sense in terms of acquisition for the cost that they have, right? Because obviously all the digital companies, as we are, OTT and IPTV, obviously have different level of overheads, so that the margin is going to be different compared to the traditional one. In the future, what's going to happen is that the users, as you said, has a limited willingness to pay, right? So we have seen from recent research that they are willing to pay, for example, for maximum 3-4 subscriptions for their entertainment content. This means that you cannot just rely on the super fans that is going to subscribe to that individual service because want to watch just that, because that is going to be too niche, right, in terms of marketing, in terms of future growth. So the way I see it, the development of the future is going towards a super bundle source of aggregation, where you're going to be having the possibility to actually put all this content together, and this can be done by a player as an OTT, as for example DAZN. It could be done by a telco, it can be done by an OEM, but that really is going to allow it to go in the direction of what the users would want, because in 5 years' time, it's not going to be willing to pay, multiple services for all this live. What is sure is that probably the cost also of this is going to be different from what we used to have in the past, because again, we're going to have technology, scalability, and the OTT words that is going to help us to reduce the fixed cost and makes different type of margins, so also to transfer these savings to the final users. So hopefully the final future of the sports is really going to be more accessible.
So a fixed cost per household in a monthly basis to get access to sportainment.
Yeah.
Let's put it this way, bundling different services, one of them being sport access.
Yeah.
I agree with Veronica. I think, I really think that the market is going to consolidate in the next years. There's too much fragmentation. I don't believe that premium by itself can offer what the consumer wants, because if you want to retain and grow user bases, you will need to have longer forms of content, longer tail forms of content. You need to keep the user active with fresh live content, and it's proven now. We have data that informs that most of the people that follow the big clubs, they also follow the local clubs, and they want to be engaged with these types of contents. I think that there's space to have a one-stop shop for football or one-stop shop for American football. I think I don't know how it's going to look like if I look into the consumer and see it. I really think that building platforms for sports, for specific sports, could be one of the trends that will start happening soon, with a big role of the big rights holders, the big federations. Nevertheless, I think that sponsorship is going to play a huge role, because some of this content, or most of this content, is not monetizable through subscription. So you need to find formats and ways where subscription plays with sponsorship. I think millennials, they are really reluctant to pay for content, but that's coming a bit later than 2020. Millennials know the Generation Z and etc. So that come a bit later. We'll see how it goes. But I think data will tell us, and studies around the consumers will guide us the right way.
Okay, obrigado. Rodrigo.
Look, I represent a brand. I'm not part of OTT, but I think, or what I see is that for live broadcasting, the winner will be the one that allows viewers to interact, to participate on the game I mentioned before. Imagine I don't know if it's 5 years or 10 years, but imagine fans or viewers at home deciding which player goes to the bench, or if instead of VAR, changing the VAR for the decision of the fans. I think the winner will be the one that allows that interaction of the fan. That's the only way, and from brand perspective, that would be great news, because what we are looking for is for engaged viewers. So I think, I don't know if it's 5 years or 10 years, but I think that's the way it should go.
Good. I think that we are out of time, so thanks indeed for taking your time. Thanks everybody, all the best, also all to the way to the Super Bowl. Grazie mille, Veronica. Obrigado, Pedro. Muchas gracias, Rodrigo. And thanks all the audience. And please give him a huge round of applause.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, up next, in a little short while, we're going to have here Ronaldo Nazario de Lima trying to speak about his new project from last season, Real Valladolid, and he's going to explain to us which is the present of his new project and which is the future. Gracias a todos por este penúltimo panel. Nos falta uno antes de la ceremonia de clausura. Dentro de un ratito, aquí, muy brevemente, va a estar Ronaldo Nazario de Lima para explicarnos su proyecto desde el año pasado, que no es otro que el de un equipo de primera división en la Liga de Fútbol Español, que es el Real Valladolid, su presente y también su futuro. In a short while, we'll be right here back. Thank you.